I think you have to take a couple of steps to see what the effects are.
Okay.
One of the things I would say to people about the way this financial crisis was resolved, to the degree it has been resolved, was rather like an International Monetary Fund structural adjustment program of the sort that happened to Mexico back in 1982 and happened to thousands of times around the world since then. And the general principle of those crises is you bail out the banks at the expense of the well-being of the people, because in 1982 the New York investment banks, which had lent all the money to Mexico, were bailed out by the US Treasury bailing out Mexico, but the condition was that the living standards of the Mexican population and life in Mexico City became really hell.
Right.
Now, what we've seen is the first step in the solution to this crisis was to bail out the banks.
Right.
They have been bailed out, but now what we're seeing is everybody's saying, well, there's a big strain on state budgets, so we now need austerity. So now it is what I call socket to the people time.
Okay. What
happened in Mexico City after 1983 or something like that is now about to be visited on urban populations throughout the United States and throughout Europe, because we're going to solve the debt crisis of the banks by creating debts in the fiscal budgets of states, which then have to be paid off by the people, cutting back on their lifestyle. Now it's going to fall very heavily, as we see in Britain, for example, or these draconian cuts on education, social services of all kinds, and the same thing is happening in California. So if you look at what's happening to the University of California system and what's happening to British higher education now, you see parallels, which is going to have big impact on that sector, but it's going to be generalized throughout the urban population. And I think you're going to see the same thing here as in France. You have reform of pensions and you have reform of social services. So urban populations are going to suffer in general because of the austerity programs which are going to be administered by the state apparatuses, but they're administering them because they needed the money to pay out the banks. So you always have to think austerity for the people here, mega money for the banks. There's a connector too, and you see there's a class war going on here.
Right.
And Warren Buffett has this wonderful, this big financier has this wonderful kind of statement. He said, of course there's class war, and we, my class, the rich class, are waging it, and we're winning. and I think this is a very good way to put it. He put it that way, so remember that's what's happening. And this austerity is about that, and I think it has to be resisted.
But isn't there something different today, say, for example, from the crisis of 1975 in New York City, when it was the cities that were bankrupt. Right now, it's more like the states are bankrupt.
Right.
But that, according to you, also plays on the urban. So
yeah, I mean, my friend Dick Walker, the geographer who's been working on California, and it really has been, he's wrote this very nice thing about, California as the epicenter of this whole crisis. Kind of says California is playing the same role as New York City played back in 1975, but it's a bigger scale of the crisis. It's at that different scale now. It all depends on how we come out of the present crisis. To begin with, not all of the banking system everywhere in the world is in crisis. The Indian banking system is doing fine. The Chinese banking system is doing fine. Actually, the Canadian banking system is doing fine.
Okay.
It's highly localized, and that part of it, of the banking system, which is Wall Street and so on, has had to be bailed out. So it's partly that. But then the question is, how do we come out of it? Now, we could either come out of it with a major reform of financial institutions, in which case we wouldn't have another financial crisis, or we can come out of it business as usual, as it was before, which is largely what we're doing. And to the degree that the last crisis was based very much on production of fictitious capital, and sales of fictitious asset values and all the rest of it, I see we're getting back into the same kind of issue. So my view is that we're likely to see another crisis, maybe not located in exactly the same way in the same place. Remember, I think there's an inner connection between the crisis of 1997-98, which was located in East and Southeast Asia, which was a huge kind of financial fiscal crisis in that part of the world, and everybody in the United States was saying, what crisis? Now, if you're in the United States, everybody's saying there's a huge crisis, and if you're in China right now, people will be saying, what crisis?
I see.
And so, you know, you have to look at the uneven geographical development of this also. And it's perfectly possible, however, next time around we'll see the crisis shifting back into East and Southeast Asia, because there are a lot of unwise investments going on there, and the boom in China looks to me like it could be unsustainable.